So one of the things that also is, I think, different about this plan than the new housing marketplace plans, the various plans that were released under Bloomberg, is the focus on the rent-regulated stock. Councilmember Williams, let me ask you a little bit about this, the rent-stabilized stock. I mean, the plan talks about being more aggressive in protecting tenants from abuse. I'm sure that you've seen this happening, in your to your constituents, and I'm wondering sort of what aspects of rent stabilization do you think can be changed to tighten the rules without taking away the incentive that property owners have to continue to maintain their properties and invest in their properties?
One, I just want to say I'm most excited to see the high percentage of the units that were based in preservation, because we had to spend a lot of time in the advocacy world when I was doing housing, organizing, trying to convince the Bloomberg administration that we can't build ourselves out of the problem. So originally, his number didn't include preservation. He was going to build 165,000 units. Somewhere midway, he changed it and said he was going to preserve a large part of it, which is what we should have done at the beginning, and which is what we're doing here. I'm a little concerned. I want to just know, hopefully, as the plan draws out, where we're going to preserve those units, because I know a lot of the low-hanging fruit was taken up from the previous administration, so it'll be interesting to see where we can do it. Rent regulation and rent-regulated units, obviously, I think would be the largest part we can get. Unfortunately, as a city, we can't do it ourselves, a lot of the things with the rent regulation. And my hope is that the administration, although they put the repeal of ERSTAT in the document, they haven't really pushed and haven't really said out loud that this is something that they're going to push for. And my hope is that the Mayor de Blasio will push for home rule and repeal of ERSTAT law, like Mayor Bloomberg pushed for getting education back to New York City. I think that's the key and the only way we can really have an effect on that we want to have. And I just always would like to make sure I mention that rent regulation is not just about the rents, which is important, but is what you alluded to. There are protections that go along with rent regulation that is very important to keeping not only units affordable, keeping them maintained, making sure that people who need it can be in it without fear of being kicked out arbitrarily or for trying to make sure that the code enforcement is there. So it's very important that we do that. The key to me is actually repealing ERSTAT so we can have a lot more control as far as I'm concerned. And one of the things I want to mention before, something the Commissioner alluded to, and it may have been said before, but we have to make sure that when we're building the units, when we're building the new housing, it's not done in a silo. That we have to make sure there's economic engines there. We have to make sure that there are things that people need. And one of the mistakes that were made in the previous building was that we didn't think about it as a neighborhood. So we put a lot of housing, but we didn't think about supermarkets. We didn't think about things that people would need to live. So I want to make sure that we stay focused on that as we're building housing. We're actually building and encouraging neighborhood growth.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether you want to respond quickly to that, Vicki, but I did want to also make sure we have time to go on to talk about some questions related to homelessness and supportive housing. So I'm going to ask you a question, and if you want to take some of your time, which is sort of, can you explain a little bit more about how the city will expand and its use of homeless set-asides and how they will be monitored?
So, that's really a two-part question, and maybe I can share some of that time with Eric on that. And there's both a set of process issues, and then there's a substantive issue about paying for and underwriting the homeless set-aside units. So let me tackle, Eric, if I may. I'm going to tackle the process point and then turn to you. But on the process point, I mean, as you know, we do require homeless set-asides in many of our buildings and that we finance. And one of the things that we've certainly learned in terms of process is two things. One is that we've got to work a lot harder to streamline the time that it takes to actually fill those units, that the time between getting a person out of the homeless shelter and into one of our units just takes way too long, which is terrible for the family, and also terrible, of course, for the owner of the building who's sitting there with an empty unit. And so we're really working on bottleneck reviews, both for the supportive housing clients and for the homeless clients to try to reduce that period of time so that we can get people in there quickly and get those units into the families and the households that need them as quickly as possible. The second part of that is that we know that we have to make sure that the set-aside units actually go to the families for whom they are being set aside. So actually go to the formerly homeless, actually go to supportive housing clients. And so we're going to really be tightening up on a lot of the work that we do to make sure that if one family moves out, that the re-rentals of those properties also are going to the formerly homeless or to people coming out of shelters or to the supportive housing clients. So we're going to be making a lot of, we already are working, in fact, we just had a meeting yesterday on this. We're already working very hard to streamline a lot of that, to beef up those processes, and I think that will go some of the distance towards making sure that the units that we are setting aside are actually going to the families to whom they mean the most and are intended.
Yeah, I'd add a little bit to that just on the pure kind of deal side and underwriting side, and we've had a lot of discussions, and I've worked a lot with across the units at HPD and especially with Jessica Katz and supportive housing. We come across regularly when we reposition portfolios, either distressed portfolios that we've worked on previously with our asset management unit, or distressed portfolios that come to us in the world from over leverage, or whether we look at our year 15 deals that are coming up to year 15 and are looking to either decouple or extend or recapitalize. And what we found is that there are a lot of very useful and important opportunities for providing additional homeless units in many of those buildings and properties. And a lot of it, in many of them, there were already homeless set-asides, some of which were very high homeless set-asides that are either expiring or kind of attriting down. And as we recapitalize those properties, we've seen opportunities to formalize, to extend that, and many of those properties also are already at very, very low rents. So the cost to repair and improve that property, put it under an extended regulatory agreement, and maintain those lower rents for at least that tier or a tier of those units, not necessarily rent restructure across that, has been very useful. And we're doing that increasingly in a number of portfolios. The other opportunity, which I think is a really important opportunity, and I think about this a lot, we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years looking at properties that may be exiting some sort of a regulatory structure. And we also spent kind of a strategic overlay to look at things, where would be the best dollar spent, meaning where could we both extend that but also deal with whatever physical or financial distress was happening. At the same time, there is a whole pipeline of year 15 tax credit deals, and we work a lot with a traditional pipeline of LISC and enterprise properties, but there are other non-LISC, non-enterprise properties in neighborhoods across the city, some of which are in neighborhoods that have gentrified, have rising rents. And I think it's an important opportunity for us to look at preservation there. And one of the things we've thought about, and we're going to be thinking about more as we go forward, is does it make sense in certain cases, particularly where you're inducing someone to extend and stay in a program, to do a couple things around mixing incomes as you go past year 15 and past the extended period, which may be to do things like in exchange for offering a tier of units that rather than staying at 60% of area median income for tax credits, you might open up a tier 20%, say at 80% of AMI or 100% of AMI. And in exchange for that, you also open up a lower tier that might be 5% of units that could be for formerly homeless families. And that, there are a number of really great public policy goals that can be addressed through that. One, it's inducing the property to stay in a program and undergo extended affordability, even just the bulk of them that remain at the tax credit rents. But two, it addresses that public policy goal that you hear in the plan of mixing incomes upward where it might make sense, and also mixing incomes downward in locations where it may make sense. And I think we're trying to be really thoughtful about how we can do all those things at once. And it takes time and it takes energy, but it's doable, and we think it's really important to do, and we're looking forward to doing more of that.
So, Rich, I know you've thought also a lot about how to use financing creatively to house a greater range of households with a greater range of incomes. And as Commissioner Bean said, the plan quadruples the commitment to housing extremely low-income households. But the question is there any secret to getting to this sort of heightened affordability other than more capital dollars?
Once again, you answered the question. Yeah, the secret always is money, right? Money is always the answer, right? No big surprise there. But there is some things, and we've been trying to make some push with DC on this. Tax credits, obviously, such an important tool for all of that we do. Last year, we had more subsidy coming in from tax credits than the combined HDC, HPD capital budget. Obviously, as we're discussing, those budgets are going to go up, but even still, LIHTC is incredibly important. So one of the ideas that we've been trying to push, and we're trying to kind of fine-tune it to see if we can make a little progress in Washington. I know that doesn't sound like that's even possible. It's hard, but it is an income averaging approach to LIHTC, which allows you to hopefully get credit for when you average at 60% AMI, so that you can do 80% units and 40% units. And that by doing that, one, we're creating more diversity in those communities, and on every policy level, this is better. This is a better thing for us to do. But the challenge that we sometimes face is that when we lose that very rich subsidy from LIHTC, and when we do units that are above 60% AMI, even if we're offsetting it with doing units that are 40 or 30% AMI, so that overall we're getting the same income in the building and we're serving a wider variety of folks, that we don't get credit for that. And so that is something that it's an idea that I believe its time has come. We're trying to fine tune it, but that would be really fabulous, because it really does allow us to sort of do this income averaging. And once again, it's on a policy level, it's such a no-brainer. It is so much more consistent with the move towards fair housing and creating diverse communities that but it's always hard to get change, and it's always hard when you're looking for Washington to act.